I'm joined here with Susanne Etti from Intrepid Travel and Jared Meyers from Legacy Vacation Resorts. I've asked them to come with me to talk about the science-based targets and the relevance of those for the travel industry. Of the 116 companies and organizations that are so far declared with us at Tourism Declares, Intrepid and Legacy are the two companies that are also registered with the science-based targets. So they are the two ideal companies, one in accommodation, one as tour operator, for us to have a discussion about what this initiative is and why we think it's something that has such relevance to those who's working in Tourism Declares and the wider industry. But first, let's just get a little context on the two companies. Susanne, just a brief introduction to tell me a little bit about Intrepid Travel as a business.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeremy. So Intrepid Travel is the world's largest adventure travel company and has been a pioneer in sustainable travel for over 30 years. We have been carbon neutral since 2010 and became in 2018 the world's largest certified B Corp.
Perfect. And Jared, Legacy Vacation Resorts.
Thank you, Jeremy. Legacy Vacation Resorts is headquartered in Orlando, Florida, but we have resorts throughout the state of Florida, Colorado, Nevada, and New Jersey. We tend to have larger accommodations because we are a part-time share, part hotel. So a lot of our rooms are over 1,000 square feet. They're in areas where we have mountains and beaches and theme parks. And so it's more the, kind of the fun part of travel, not just the business part of travel. We became a B Corp in March of 2019. We used that opportunity as a way to really go heavily into our value system as a company, very strongly around social and environmental responsibility, being inclusive, regenerative, equitable, and really, the science-based targets and Tourism Declares just fits very neatly in with what we care about as an organization.
Great. So I'll just stay with you as you mentioned it there, Jared. How would you describe to someone in a sort of elevator pitch, what are the science-based targets?
So using science-based targets helps us really create accountability around the statements that we make, that we want to reduce emissions and kind of what that means. And it's accountability because it ties into something that is achievable according to science. So we're relying on experts to help guide what needs to be done, and we determine with our own business kind of how to get there. So it's tied into an expert framework rather than us trying to invent something ourselves without the expertise to do so.
And I mean, it's not, but it is an initiative itself. I mean, it's not just experts suggesting things. There is a science-based targets initiative.
Yes. Yeah. So the reason I talked about experts is just more the general consensus out there that if we want to avert the worst consequences of climate change and the climate crisis, we have to meet certain science-based targets to get there. And it's not like if we miss that the world ends, but it does get radically worse every time you miss these targets and you move on to the next target. So it's very important that we do achieve these targets.
Sure. Susanne, and obviously you also signed up to them a little bit more on these. I mean, as Jared says, we need to achieve them. What are the targets that are referring to?
So what we're referring to with science-based targets, really that it's a set of goals that have been developed to help business like ours to really provide that clear route to how to decarbonize your business. So how do you reduce greenhouse gas emissions in your business to really kind of be on a pathway? Nowadays, it's around the 1.5 degrees. So when they initially set up that initiative, that came straight after the Paris Agreement, so it's 5 years ago now, 2015, it was initially around the well below 2 degrees. But we now know, again, as Jared said, the scientists tell us there was a big report from the IPCC back in 2018 saying actually 1.5 is really what we should need to aim for. So that's really where the science-based target helps us to provide that pathway. And when we say science-based target initiative, it's a coalition of 4 main organizations that you might be, many of the call will be familiar with. It's the WWF, the Worldwide Fund, the UN Global Compact, the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is normally referred to CDP, and also the World Resource Institute. And that's in collaboration with the We Mean business. And they provide that framework that helps us, as Jared referred to, is to really kind of approve, verify, but also approve a company's target to ensure that the emission reduction that you're putting forward for 5 to 15 years are in line with a 1.5 degree pathway.
Okay. When you say they provide a framework, I mean, beyond them saying it's 1.5 or, you know, well below 2, what do you, I mean, do you mean more than that when you say they provide a framework?
I guess what I mean with is that they really provide guidance to the business. So because it's also providing methodologies, and which makes it maybe also the link to where tourism stands out, because they started off, they have a lot of sectoral approaches, so methodologies. And think about the aluminium industry, it's very homogeneous industry. So comparing different companies within the aluminium sector is much easier when you look at their emission reduction because they're very alike, so homogeneous. Whereas the tourism sector, even with us both speaking on this call, is more the tourism sector in general is just much more heterogeneous. So that's where the Science-Based Target Initiative, especially with these more homogeneous business, provides guidance, and that's where I refer to as framework, helping companies. Whereas then for us, was probably the first challenge is that there is no approach available that's been provided, but there's guidance how you go about it.
So
you're not left alone.
Okay, so what's
you're not left alone.
Guidance? Do you mean experts actually sort of being at the other end of the call, or?
Yeah. So that's definitely exists too. So they have a very comprehensive website where they're really kind of including a website with content, but they're also doing a lot. If we look at it as a broader knowledge sharing, they have webinars that they're putting out for those companies that are really at the start of trying to understand, should I actually go down this road? What is science-based target? But also to business like ours, where it's much more detailed, going into the nitty-gritty. In addition, they have tools available on their website that help you really to develop your science-based target. And that's where I found it really useful. Also, in addition, it is possible to get on calls with them. So to get some guidance with them, like not hand-holding through the whole process. And I think that comes to the point that sometimes you can decide to do it in your organization on your own, but it's also when you have finances to actually work with a partner to help you who has the expertise in setting the goals to work together towards the end goal.
Okay. And Jared, has that been your experience with Legacy, or have you had different experiences?
No, I would say I would share that experience that Susanne shared. Maybe what I would add is, I think without a science-based target, a company lacks a vision of really where are we going. Because talking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions could be as simple as we're using 20% less than we did last year. That sounds good, but it's actually a meaningless statement because you don't know where you really started last year. You don't know what that means 20 years, 50 years from now. Even if you reduce by 20% a year, you really need to look at that in the context of what are we driving to? What is the vision? If the vision is a 1.5 degree increase, we want to stay below, then every effort we do has to tie back to that. So we could say we're 20% less than last year, but then we have to go one step further and say, and that means we're on a trajectory to achieve or not achieve, that 1.5%. And you can speak to that even in greater detail.
I get it. And what year rather did you sign up, join, whatever the right term would be for the targets?
Mm-hmm.
Jared.
So actually that we signed earlier this year, and I will thank Intrepid for that. That's how we became part of this group. Was I saw Lee Barnes in Taos, New Mexico at a B Corp Climate Collective, where we're all talking about becoming net zero by 2030. And he said, you have to join Tourism Declares, you have to do the science-based targets. It's right in line with what we're talking about. And I said, it's a no-brainer. Well, I'll sign up once we, I think, go back. And so we probably signed up sometime in February or March, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And in terms of the process, is there guidance, roughly how long a process is it from signing up to being out the other side, or does it not work like that?
I guess it depends on where your starting point is. So I think there are some more organizations out there that are very far along, and they would just find that they signed up and there may not be an additional step they're taking beyond what was already part of their plan. Others, on the other hand, could be heading into this and saying, I don't even know really what any of this means. Never heard of scope 1, 2, and 3 in my life. And that's true too. In fairness, I didn't know what scope 1, 2, and 3 was before we became a B Corp. I knew about climate change, and I had heard global warming, and I knew that was a problem and didn't want to contribute to it, but didn't really know how to do that on a more individual basis. And so there's a lot of education that needs to go into that. But I think the value also of the group that you're helping pull together, Jeremy, and this Tourism Declares, is that we're trying to have a great knowledge sharing between those who've mastered this and are doing this as part of their day-to-day job responsibility, and those who are coming into it and saying, I want to contribute to a better planet, but I don't know how. And if we can share that, that's going to really help us truly achieve that 1.5 or be below that 1.5 degree target.
So picking you up on the one thing there, which definitely it's very kind of you to say what you said about Tourism Declares, but in the sort of spirit of that, scope 1, 2, 3, I mean, how, and I know they're going to be different, your answers for you in accommodation and you as a tour operator. So Jared, what does it mean for an accommodation provider, scope 1, 2, 3?
So I know that I won't say this as well as our head who is in charge of this. So I hope Susanne cleans up where I may deviate a little bit off. But generally speaking, it deals with it's scope 1, items that you are directly responsible for. I mean, you can't really lay off responsibility somewhere else. Kind of the whole conversation of that's really not something we created directly. It's more indirect. So maybe in simple terms, direct versus indirect. So at your scope 1, it's what are we directly responsible for emitting as a company? What are the buildings that we own outright? What are the assets we own outright that are making these emissions? As you go into scope 2, where are we kind of buying our energy from and obtaining resources that allow us to operate, but that we may not be directly creating ourselves, but we are, without that, we couldn't be in business. So to be clear, so we are still responsible for it. We just didn't create it maybe directly. And then when you kind of go into scope 3, you really look at the holistic sense of the business and say, again, if we want to remain in business, our guests need to show up here, right? How are they showing up at our resorts? Are they flying here? Are they driving? Are they taking electric vehicles? How's our supply chain? How do we get the food that we're serving to our guests that are here? And so you look a lot further beyond that, and that's where some companies in the past have complained and said, yeah, but we're not doing that. That's our suppliers and others. But there's no resort without food and beverage, and there's no resort need if guests can't get there in the first place. And so all 3 scopes have to be addressed and resolved, or else we won't hit the targets.
And how does that, I mean, that for a tour operator, I imagine that's even more complicated because...
It is even more complicated. It is more complicated. But before I dive into it, I just wanted to touch base on the point on the commitment side, just to give listeners also another one. So we committed in December. And as Jared said, so you commit and then you have 2 years, so 24 months actually time to develop your science-based target. So in our case, it's like, and as also Jared said, companies come at different stages. So we had a carbon management plan in place since 2010. So we are measuring every year our carbon emissions from all our operations and all our trips. So we had this information already in place, but even though with this information in place, it's just that next step up to really understand, and that's where we kind of line over shortly to scope 3, there's even more work that you need to do. So it takes also time, resources to do that type of work. So in our case, we actually decided to split our project also in 2 phases to first understand what would a science-based targets involve and what are the levers to actually reduce, is it feasible, then commit, and then using that additional time now that we had until now, the 10 months, to really work it out what it is. And then you send it for approval, and that makes also Science-Based Target Initiative, I think, really unique, is that you actually submit your targets, and a technical panel within the initiative will actually assess, audit, verify your targets. They come back to you with questions. So they're not just signing off, they really go through to make sure that what you're proposing, your reductions, are in line. And nowadays you have to do it in line with 1.5-degree pathway, which I think is really important. And so in that context, is the scope 3 is definitely for us also the challenging one, but the really important one. So scope 3 are your value chain emission. And in a way, we are all each other's scope 3. So if you're thinking of our headquarters is in Melbourne, we are in a multi-story building. This building, or the investor, the company behind, also set a science-based target. We are their scope 3 because we are their tenants, and they are our landlords, and we are their scope 3 because we are their tenants. So by each of us doing something about our emissions, we're helping each other with the target. But overall, I would say scope 3 is the most challenging part. There, you have to do, in our case, and I think Jared, for you is the same, we have triggered scope 3 because when you look at your overall greenhouse gas inventory in a given year, you look at scope 1, 2, and 3, and scope 3 is over 40% for us. And that includes commuting of your staff. We did a commuter survey to understand how is our staff actually getting to the office. It involves business travel, it involves marketing, IT. So there's quite a few categories. And it is challenging to get all the data. And then also going forward, how do you start to reduce? Some of the low-hanging fruits, easy business travel, we're seeing it right now. Do more video calls and decide, make it count if you decide to go to a conference. But there are others that are much more challenging. If you think about leasing, for example, cruising ships for tours, like you don't own them, so you're leasing them, so you don't have as much control about what energy efficiency measures, for example, a company is taking in the boat. But I stop here and give you a chance to guide us to the next question.
Well, no, because I felt, the question I actually wanted, I was expecting you to say then, which I do think that at this moment you should at least acknowledge, because the process of reaching approval for your science-based targets was not totally coincidental that we're sitting here speaking at the end of October 2020, is it? Because when exactly did targets get approved?
We had them in September approved, and then announced it externally just the other week in October. So, and that's really about, for us, it's really important. Yes, we are the first tour operator, but we certainly don't want to be the only one. So it is very lonely up there, and it's really about, and that's also why it's a pleasure to be on this call, is like we want to inspire other tour operators, but across the whole tourism sector, is to actually embrace this journey. And that's starting with declaring a climate emergency, because that was really, we declared one in January. And part of our plan was setting a science-based target. So we had committed, but it was really kind of putting it out there to all our stakeholders, from staff, but across the whole range, to say, this is what we are committed to. And this is, it makes sense to do it, because without limiting greenhouse gas emission, we certainly don't have the tourism that we're seeing now, and we need to act on it. Indeed.
I'm delighted you said that we want to encourage more people to follow both of your leads. And I think very much the last sort of few questions I'd like to ask you about is very much about that. So I'll start with Jared. Jared, I mean, as you said, you've had less time in this process, but have there been, some sort of learnings already that you, as a result of undergoing the process, that you find have been revealing, either in a positive or concerning way?
So at the outset, I guess when you're not measuring, I'd say many companies aren't measuring their social and environmental aspects as a whole, more or less, so not just their greenhouse gas emissions. And you really don't know where you stand until you do your measurement. So I think the first measurement for every company is eye-opening, because you have no idea. Sometimes it can be good. You could say that's much better than I thought, but until you measure it, you have no idea. And so whether one wants to do this because they believe just it's the right thing to do, or just simply, I want to future-proof my business in this industry, both are very strong reasons for why, one should commit to science-based targets. There is no tourism industry, and there's no planet if we don't figure this out. And so we don't need to present it like in the negative, but even in the positive. I mean, most of us are in this industry because we love it, right? Tourism is a phenomenal industry where we get to meet each other and learn about each other's cultures and have fun. And it's just a great industry to be in. We want to preserve it, but we need to maintain a sense of harmony in order to preserve that. And part of that harmony is with our environment. And that requires us to have a level amount of emissions. I always found it fascinating when I first, learned. At first, everyone talks about carbon in a negative way, and you're like, no carbon, right? Everyone thinks. The reality is carbon's not bad. It's just too much of it too quickly is bad. And that's what we're facing. So we're setting these targets in order to reduce the rate at which we're emitting it to a rate that the environment and the world can kind of process it. And if we can do that, then this becomes less of an issue. So I'm sorry, I did go beyond your question. I think
no, not at all.
I got a little excited because I buy into this in the bigger picture of it's not just a numerical exercise. It's what does our industry represent and how do we maintain that? Without science-based targets, it doesn't exist.
Does it help? I mean, connecting with you said about the sort of bigger picture. I mean, you've got a large company, many different establishments. I'm assuming therefore a sizable staff. Does it help to have something such as a framework like this to engage people with the journey that you're on as a company?
It does, because it also helps us put things numerically to help us create report cards. Without a report card, it's hard to generate progress in a particular direction. So it does help us with our employees. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of companies fail because they think that their executive team can accomplish something like this. And that's not accurate. Nor is it accurate to think you can outsource it to a consultant. This has to be ingrained in the DNA of the company, which means every employee ideally needs to understand what this means, how they can take steps to help the company achieve its goals. When they learn that, they actually go home and they practice those steps individually too. So there's a ripple effect there. Mm-hmm. And if you do it really well, then your customers and all your guests that are coming learn about it also. They bring it home and they start doing it, and a massive ripple effect occurs. So like we always say with our organization, the biggest kind of stakeholder that we impact are our customers. We have 300,000 people a year that get impacted when they come to our resorts and they see our neat in-room video that talks about our efforts, and see our signage on the walls, and they see why we charge an environmental fee and why we give them a reusable water bottle at check-in so they don't have to use plastic because of all the, not just plastic being bad, but all the environmental aspects and emissions associated with the creation of plastic. And so we kind of beat that message over and over again in a tourism friendly way, because people are on vacation, so that when they go home, they can practice this. And I think that's the key. I really feel that's the key to unlocking widespread acceptance of this. Is it can't be isolated to a consultant or the executives. It has to be amongst all the employees, amongst all the customers, amongst your supply chain. And if you can do that, you can have a massive impact in the world.
Fantastic.
Very well said.
Susanne, and in fact, and Jared as well, but Susanne, one of the other big resistances to making these sort of changes is a perception, and in some places potentially a reality, to do with cost. But is it necessarily the case that undergoing a process like this demands that makes your business more expensive to run, or is this actually a way of making cost savings in the long run?
I think it's exactly the latter. It's really around cost saving in the long run. And to the point that Jared said, it's really by understanding your greenhouse gas inventory to that level to actually explore the supply chain, you're getting such an amazing insight into your greenhouse gas inventory, but also by engaging all these different departments. Again, you're creating these connections, but you're also understanding so much more how, say, you, in our case, digital print, like the print department, what they are doing, but not just on the surface, but much more ingrained. And that's really to the point that Jared made, is you have to really kind of bring this into the whole organization. Everyone is part of it. And that really is also where the operational efficiency comes in. It might, fair enough, at the beginning look like, wow, this is a massive project. We probably can't do it alone. We might have to get a consultancy on board, but it's only for the technical side. A lot is really in-house that needs to be done. But there's also a difference between larger and smaller enterprises. So Science-Based Target has also a framework for SMEs, for smaller, medium-sized enterprise. So that's also really important to keep in mind, because that also reflects in the cost that you pay for the technical review. But over time for us, and it's already one of the things having gone through the process, is to identify opportunities, your levers. And that's what I spoke to initially. It's like that we broke the project up into phases to already understanding what are the levers, because the initial concern from business can be, and is I think very valid, here you're proposing this to us, but how are we actually getting there? What will it cost us? What are our benefits beyond the leadership, the branding? And it's really showing here actually there are these levers, and that will actually mean we see operational efficiency. So when I built, for example, the business case, I actually even compared a previous office move to a new building and what our energy efficiency was in the old building per FTE and square meter, and what it was like in the new building where we are now in an Energy Star rating building, and it actually had halved. So yes, we're paying a premium for an Energy Star building, but at the same time, we've also seen that our energy, like intensity per FTE and also square meter, has come down. And that's, I think, is just one of many examples to show that it helps with operational and cost savings.
And maybe something that I would add additional, because everything Susanne said I agree with, is when you talk about like future-proofing your business, I know that depending on where you are in the world today, it's some countries are not well embracing the need to move in this direction, but my opinion is it's really just a matter of time. They will eventually. They're just, for whatever reason, not doing it now. And what will happen is when they embrace it because they have to and they need to, that will also involve mandates, probably by those governments, on their businesses to operate in certain ways that will involve reducing emissions. It is much harder to radically reduce emissions in a short period of time than it is to create a plan and do it over a period of time. So Intrepid has started this process long ago. They're very far into the process. Not that they still don't have more work to do, but it is, they were very smart to start when they did, because they have a massive organization that requires time to get there. If suddenly they hadn't done that and they were told that in 2 years' time, we need you to be reduced to a certain level, it would almost be like facing COVID, right? It would be like, we just gotta shut down 50% of our tours, because I don't know how else to achieve that target. You can't do it through adjusting levers. We actually would have to shut down. So if businesses are not setting a longer term plan to roll this out, they will at some point be faced with an immediate change, which is necessary, and they'll be incapable of doing that, which will mean that businesses that have started early in the process have basically future-proofed for that eventuality.
Yeah. And maybe on that point too is maybe another risk that I would like to add is also the financial liability, especially for organizations that are committed to carbon neutrality. And that means that they are purchasing carbon offsets, but it's also if you do not actually decarbonizing your business in a normal non-pandemic world, you're likely to grow. And that means your overall footprint will grow. And that means also you are actually requiring more of carbon offsets to ensure that you're staying within your carbon neutrality. And that's, I think, is also really important. One is that it's kind of a financial liability because offsets are likely to get more expensive in the future, but also what are you actually telling the outside world, your stakeholders, when you're not actually starting to reduce your emissions? And exactly to the point, the earlier you do, the better, because otherwise you're just part of the problem.
And you're right, that affected us. Our New Jersey resort is our only resort right now that uses 100% renewable. It was 16% of our portfolio. And I think it's been a year now that it's been on renewable energy. We were buying carbon offsets. We're no longer buying those there because we're
exactly
using offsets for the rest of the operation currently.
Yeah, and there will always, in this whole transition, and in our case, we have a 15 years target. It's like there will be every year still unavoidable emissions. It won't happen overnight, but it's that gradual kind of decarbonizing of our business, and that means that our emissions are coming down, and the amount that we need to offset each year, and which is the unavoidable part of it. Over to you again, Jeremy.
No, I think you brought it very nicely, both of you, to a natural end, because you very much talked about the urgency and the need, and that saves me from asking you how you would encourage people to get on board. But let's hope that people watching think, the science-based targets make sense for us. And said there, Jared, that it is hard to do these things quickly, and therefore the earlier one begins, the better. Having both at one point started onto the path of the science-based targets, let's suppose someone's watching now and they think they might want to do so. There's some advice you would give just to someone who was right at the very beginning.
Shall I go first? Okay, so one thing as I said at the start of this webinar, the Science-Based Target Initiative has a lot of resources and very good webinars for those that are just starting out. So that would be, from a kind of learning perspective, a good start to actually sign up to the website, get on a webinar to learn from others. But then we're part of Tourism Declare. There's a whole community there for you. So really find us also within the community, and definitely for tour operators that are listening in and want to hear a bit more of our experience more specifically, I'm really happy to have a separate conversation. We are planning for 2021 also to open source our learning and what we have done as a tour operator to get where we are now for the science-based targets. So that's something that we are planning for 2021. So just again, to kind of sharing our experience, our knowledge, and helping others to get on the journey, because we need everyone to get onto this path.
Brilliant. Jared?
I don't know that I have anything to add, so I'll just echo as Susanne was talking about being part of community, because it really is a never-ending process, and there will be innovation and there will be new ideas that come out a year from now, 5 years from now, that don't exist now. You need to be part of that community that is learning about that, that's participating in that, that's sharing its best practices. If you look at it as a one-time thing, like, oh, well, I'll figure it out now and it's all taken care of, you'll fail. You have to be part of this community. And so whether that's joining the Tourism Declares community and paying attention to what's being shared amongst each other and sharing questions, or joining some other communities that are involved with responsible tourism, also kind of helps in that. So you need to know, like, who can I reach out to when I have questions? If you don't know that answer, then you need to join a community where you then have that answer.
Well, that's a really wonderful place to start. So thank you very much, both of you. And I look forward to connecting with you in our community very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.